right. Well,
Yeah.
uh, are you ready to talk about our favorite Friday the 13th movie?
Is it your favorite?
No,
Okay.
no.
I don't know if we've gotten to your favorite yet. I pronounced my favorite was part two when we did part two, but I'm not sure if you've done that yet. So
I'm trying to remember if I have, it's probably changed because one of the things that's been great about this series is going back and like watching these films with the intent of talking about them afterwards. So my thoughts have evolved on a lot of these things. So movies that I didn't necessarily care about before, like Part Two, I
yeah.
hold in a lot higher esteem now. So I think we might just have to wait until December for me to say, okay, this out of all the ones we've talked about, here's the champion.
I know. Well, you can just group 6 to 12 together because they're all basically the same bad movie. But anyway,
No, one takes place in outer space. But we are here talking. This is Friday the 40th, Part 7, The New Blood. And this is one of the I've been consulting Peter Brackey's book and the documentary that they made out of it called Crystal Lake Memories throughout all of these, but part 7 is the one that I really found was the most helpful and had the most eye-opening information in terms of what went into putting this thing together. The most striking one was that the screenwriter, who apparently is so bitter towards this movie, has nothing positive to say about it, said that the mandate from the producer that Frank Mancuso hired to kind of oversee him on the project was to Xerox the final chapter. And once I read that and then watched this movie again, man, it's all over the place, down to the recap opening that they redid from like, 2 movies prior. It's like, in case you forgot what you saw 2 or 3 years ago, here it is all over again, but with a creepy old like prospector voice, there's a legend round here. I'm like, I don't know who that guy is,
hey, it's
but
Walt Gorney who played Crazy Ralph in the first two movies.
really,
Yes, yes.
I I don't even know if that was in the book. I don't think they talked about the voiceover except that they did one. Wow, I didn't even, man.
Yeah.
So that's item 1 on Crystal Lake Memories Part 2.
Yeah, so basically, he's come back from the dead to do the the voiceover. So
He did sound a little scratchier. Maybe that had to do with the way he exited the series. But I gotta say, it's this movie, even though it's not my favorite, it does have a special place in my heart because I saw it when I was 11 years old. It was like a big rotation on the sleepover movies.
yeah,
And I do like the oddball nature of it's the 7th chapter in a series that Paramount thought that they'd killed off 2 movies ago. Where do you go from here? Even John Carl Buechler, the director, said he initially think tried to turn it down by saying it's part 7. What are you doing?
yeah.
They turned it into Jason versus Carrie, where he fights a psychic teenager who wanders into Crystal Lake to seek therapy for an early childhood trauma. Now, one thing I'd like to kick off with, I want to get your high level thoughts on this film. And then I want to kind of take a detour into why there was a year-long gap between Jason Lives Part 6 and this movie. One came out in 86, this one came out in 88. There's a gap year that I'd forgotten what was going on behind the scenes until I reread that passage of Brackey's book. And it's really fascinating. So, first of all, The New Blood. You said you lump 6 through 12 into the same kind of bad movie. Where is this on the badness scale?
This is awful. I shouldn't say this, and I want to just say quickly that one of the traps or pitfalls of being a film critic or commenter or whatever one might do in this realm is that we have to be very careful not to take delight in deriding movies that are fun to put down. And it's not just genre movies. I mean, it's movies like, for example, Cats that came out last year, movies that are objectively bad in some regard, or that we have a time with.
Subjectively bad.
Yes.
Here's where everyone turns this off. I'm a defender of Cats, and I will be talking about that on another podcast very soon. So stay tuned.
I didn't mind it either. And just to digress for a second, I saw it a second time in Rio de Janeiro, and I thought it would improve by having subtitles. But it really didn't improve. But enjoyable in its own way nonetheless. But sometimes we look at movies like what we're going to talk about today, and movies that go wrong in some way, and we just have a good time thinking about clever ways to insult them or right turns of phrase that really, in a way, if we stopped and thought about it, we would know. And if we were to read Crystal Lake Memories or look into any of the backstories of these movies, that a lot of people put a lot of hard work, time, and effort into these, and a lot of thought behind them. And well, what's on the screen to the viewer who doesn't know the backstories might be one thing. You know, the entire history of the production and the professionalism behind it, and what all the players and the technicians brought to it is a whole nother thing. So we have to be careful. Like when I say they're all the same bad movie, I'm just saying that in jest in a way, because I want to be fair to some of the stuff we're going to talk about today that went into this movie, which was a degree of creativity or trying to do something different while adhering to the genre formula that had been successful for the first 6 movies. So my high-level overview or my high-level opinion of this movie is that it gets points for creativity, for taking things in a different direction, for trying to introduce an amalgam of 2 things that you mentioned earlier, which is the Carrie versus Jason dimension to it, and really looking at the series at an inflection point where the slasher genre had gone downhill a bit by the second half of the 80s decade, and saying, well, look, what could we do that would be a little bit of a twist on this bent, which would show that we're a little creative, but we're also going to satisfy the fan base with some of the stuff that we're going to do. So I want to give it points for that. And then on the other side of the coin, I just want to say, you know, sometimes because you can do something doesn't mean you should necessarily do it. And that might hold true in this movie that has a little bit of an identity crisis. It's a different way to look at it. But that's my kind of high-level overview to the backstories you mentioned earlier, and we're going to get into some of them. I mean, this was one of the juicier tell-all stories from people who were involved, from the screenwriter to the actors and the director. And so there's some fun stuff to talk about because nobody held back in their accounts of the production. So,
yeah, and I thought it was interesting because in 1987, Part 6 didn't do as well as people thought it would. It sort of critically, and it had a fan base that sort of followed after it left the theater because people were still kind of salty from what they perceived as the mistakes of Part 5. So they're like, it's Part 6, what are they going to do? So they kind of took some time off because I think it was profitable, but not nearly as much as they had hoped or kind of needed to keep going forward. And so Frank Mancuso Jr. was also, I think for the last couple of movies, he'd been looking to get out from under the heel of Friday the 13th and do some other kind of projects. But there was talk about doing Freddy versus Jason, which they didn't work out for, more than a decade later. And then also there was this idea of syndicated television with Paramount launching Star Trek The Next Generation 1987, along with Friday the 13th. And it was fascinating because there was caution that if they tried to do a series, a TV series based on, the Jason mythos, how do you do that? Are the rights all in place? But also, how do you make a whole TV series about, a killer at a camp? But then if you have a series called Friday the 13th that has nothing to do with Jason, you bring in audiences expecting to see Jason and like, what is this about a cursed antique store? So I really did like the idea because they went with the cursed antique store idea for anyone who's kind of new to this concept for Friday the 13th, the series. And initially it was going to be kind of explaining Jason's backstory. I guess it's kind of muddled because there was some idea of the hockey mask being in that opening intro, with the idea that is a cursed object that kind of caused Jason to keep coming back, even though that wasn't introduced until Part 3. And as we've discussed, zombie Jason doesn't really become a thing until Part 6. So it's all kind of muddled and they left that behind. But I just want to digress a bit. What did you think about Friday the 13th, the series? Did you watch it when it was on? Did you catch up with it later? Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, I'm going to confess that I never watched it. I remember when it came out because we were all at the sweet spot age for it, where you'd be fascinated by it. I seem to remember that I could never find where it was airing or what time it was airing and whatever it was on. And I was living out in a cornfield town with 3 channels and not sure I could ever actually access it before cable. And so I can't remember too much about it. I just remember that there was this curious issue about what it actually was or what it wasn't. And I remember it being written up in the fan magazines as well. And so I never saw it. And even when it got a video release much later, I never picked it up. So I'm kind of naive to that show, with the exception of understanding what it was about, the arc of the kind of story that you just described a minute ago. So I don't have a take on that.
It's definitely worth checking out. They put out a DVD set a few years ago. The problem with that is it's barely above like VHS transfer quality, so it's kind of murky in places, and it's not the best. And I haven't really gone back to it in a long time, but I remember when I was, 10, 11 years old, that was the perfect, I think it was on at 11 o'clock on Saturday nights. So you stay up for the first half hour of SNL, and then you watch this spooky show before you go to bed. Yeah. Some of it was really effective horror. I mean, you had, I think David Cronenberg directed an episode or two. So it got some, legit storytellers behind the camera, and there was some really cool chills. Some of it's kind of dated by now, but for something that didn't feature Jason Voorhees in it, it was surprisingly effective.
I'll say quickly, that was quite an era for horror on television, because if you couldn't see the movies that many of us wanted to see, that were the entire slasher genre, because we were 12 or 13 or whatever the case was, we couldn't get in. You were searching for anything on network television, and then later on cable, if you had it or you got it, that was in the horror realm. And this would be one of those shows. We had other shows like that too. There was the revival of Alfred Hitchcock Presents as well. And so probably you, like me, we were scouring through the TV guide looking for anything that was horror, sci-fi, or fantasy that would air at any time, whether it was Saturday afternoon or Sunday in the middle of the night or whatever it was. I think the show qualifies as one of those touch points that you would really want to see, because you just weren't of age to see the movies in the theater by yourself, and these things were being brought into your home.
Yeah. So yeah, this was definitely a golden age for kind of horror television. You had shows like Monsters and Tales from the Dark Side, Freddy's Nightmares a little bit later, and then later after that you had HBO with Tales from the Crypt. So if you wanted to find some really kind of cool, creepy, scary, and sometimes just silly stuff, it was all over the place. Friday the 13th, the series, I think, is one that I hold in really high regard. But again, I'd have to defer back to my 11-year-old self, because 43-year-old me might be like, "What is this trash?"
Yeah, I know. That's why nostalgia is dangerous. If you go back and go down memory lane,
Yeah, but I'll say something that has aged pretty well in terms of nostalgia, and this is where we might get into it, is for me, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. It is still silly, but I did like it. It's not scary. That's the other thing. But I did like the way that it was directed. John Carl Buechler had a very particular style. It's almost like the evolution of that creepy goth thing that Tom McLaughlin was doing in Part 6, particularly the way Jason would stalk through the woods after he was resurrected by Tina from the lake. He still had the chains from Part 6. His clothes were really rotted. You could tell that he'd spent 10 years at the bottom of the lake, and the makeup and the detail to attention on the Jason character really comes across. So even more so, he looks spooky in this movie. He's not just this giant hulking resurrected zombie. There is something kind of ghostly and otherworldly about him that I just really kind of appreciated.
Yeah. So basically, as you mentioned, the transition into the supernatural realm or the zombie realm in a way is what happens here. And so the idea that we're looking at a boy from the lake who has been hiding in the woods or living in a shack or otherwise, as we've seen in some of the prior installments, is sort of gone out the window. And that culmination of our kind of realization of this is in the final part of the movie, I think, when Jason is unmasked and we see what he actually looks like, which is a feat of makeup. Yeah, so the makeup job, I mean, vaults the character into a totally different realm. I mean, this is a special effect in itself, to see the sort of zombified face, if you will, where we've seen Jason unmasked in other films where he has really been a face, however horrible, that has been skin, human skin in a way, or he's looked like a deformed sort of human face. But this time we can rationalize the difference in the look because he's been waterlogged. Perhaps for so long, and so therefore anything is game. And so when Jason is finally unmasked, I mean, this feeling that he's some kind of demonic presence in a way is easy to sell because he looked completely different. And so that's that's quite interesting. I think the special effects in the final part of the film, the last 15 minutes of the film, really sell the film, because that visage of Jason as this hideous, otherworldly, unstoppable type of thing is really cemented in those moments. So I thought the makeup was really effective. I'm not so sure that there's a big difference in Jason's demeanor in the killings prior to the fact that we see him unmasked. So I know that others feel differently about this, that they feel that Kane Hodder's portrayal of Jason is somewhat different in this movie, or that maybe the supernatural element exists before we see him unmasked, but I'm not quite sure. I think there's very little required of Jason in any of these movies, other than to just be a big, strong, tall, unstoppable force. And so I think it's par for the course until he's unmasked at the end of the movie. I don't know what you thought about that, but
well, it is. There is some nuance to the portrayal, and this is the debut of Kane Hodder as Jason. He would go on to be, play that part for 4 other movies, and he developed a big, kind of cult fan base, and for good reason, I think. What he brought to Jason, and he talks about this all the time, but I don't think it can be understated, is he really turned him into this breathing, hulking creature. Like when you first see him rise out of the lake, you see him from behind, and part of this is the makeup job and part of it is the performance, but you see his spinal column through the shredded kind of torn stuff, and you see him breathing, coming up out of the water. He's alive again. He's been reborn. Later, when he is unmasked, there's a scene where Tina, I think, uses her psychic powers to throw a cup full of nails at his head, and he plucks them out one by one. And he does this grinding thing with his jaw, because he doesn't speak, but he kind of has this, why you little kind of a thing, kind of a gnashing of teeth. Yes. And that, from what I understand, that was all Hodder's input. I think there isn't a whole lot of, this is almost an evolution of the body movements that C.J. Graham was putting up, because Jason he was very much kind of a militaristic stalker, even in the opening of part 6, where he grabs the rod or the spear out of the graveyard. He kind of does this sideways turn, and then he turns it again. You can see Graham's military background in that. It kind of carries over here, where he's stalking. He's not the running Jason. He's just kind of marching through the woods toward his prey, even when they're running away from him. And you get these lovely shots. Mostly it's filmed kind of below him, so you almost feel as if you're crawling, backing away from him, even when you're not. It's just the camera doing it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think Hodder does bring a lot to this role. I feel like in other movies, because you kind of get in line with what his Jason is. In other films, it's just kind of, there's not a whole lot of innovation to his performance. But I think as far as a standout in the series, starting from this picture, I could definitely see a difference.
Well, it's interesting. Many have also said, in addition to that there's a level of emotion in Jason. Now, I don't know if this is a reach or not, but there's been talk that in this movie we see a kind of a rage in him as well, and maybe that's because he's kind of met a really formidable nemesis in this movie. Although one might say that in many of the final girls prior to this point that could be the case, but at least this one has otherworldly sorts of dimensions to her, and she proves to be pretty strong against him in ways that are totally unexpected to him, as they would be to anybody. So that's interesting too, that there's a level of anger in him, maybe as has his final showdown with her that maybe we haven't seen in the character before.
I think that point can't be overstated enough, because if you look at who Jason was supposed to be, he was, I don't want to make too much of this, because I am kind of reaching, but he was, I believe, a mentally challenged young boy who drowned at a very young age. So when he comes back as this sort of monster of vengeance, he possibly is having trouble understanding, like, this is his cosmic duty. He keeps coming back, and his only mandate is to kill, and all of his prey have been pretty easy, aside from the occasional axe to the face or getting hung or whatever. He's never seen someone with their mind send a wire around his neck and string him up, to hang him, or throw nails in his face, or any of this other stuff. So he's very likely confused and pissed off. He's like, wait, I'm the only one who's supposed to be able to like teleport places and and do this kind of a creepy stuff. So that might have been anger, maybe even a little bit of indignation, and possibly some fear.
Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting. The moment you mentioned related to the being strung up with the thing around his neck, and that to me is the best moment in the movie. Simple for a bunch of reasons. I mean, this is the unmasking, and it's a pretty cool blending of effects, including that breakaway floor that happens there as well. So there's some really cool stuff that happens in that moment. For my money, the best Jason is always going to be Steve Dash and Warrington Gillette combo in part two, just simply because I love that vision of Jason once the mask comes off. But Kane Hodder certainly made the role his own, and really held his own. I mean, this was the first time that he had, of course, played Jason due to his relationship with Buechler. So this is how he got in the movie, and C.J. Graham ended up not being in the film this time, and so I think he really figured out the character, as it were, because I think we should remember that that there's a character behind the mask, and you're mentioning the history of the character as well. I mean, it's easy to just sort of think of him as a force, and he is that too. But Kane Hodder took the character seriously and played him in his own way, and so I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I don't know if this is an invention of Kane Hodder or if it was in the screenplay, and maybe you can help me out here. It feels like this is almost Jason Voorhees with a bit of the Freddy influence, because he is much more playful in the way that he kind of toys with his victims in this movie than I think we've really seen before. The kills previously have been creative, but they're almost incidental jokes. Like in part 6, we had the people out on the paintball range. Jason flings the one guy into the tree, and then he falls down. There's been a smiley face carved into it. That's that's a gag. But in this one, Jason is like the one girl who's leaning out the van calling after her boyfriend, and she gets the party favor in the eye, and you got that little squeak. Because if you think about it, the boyfriend leaves the van, Jason pops his head like a grape, so he's dropped the party favor. So you imagine there's a cut where like Jason is feeling around on the ground for that party favor, and they're like, I know what I can do.
Yes, right. So he's having a little more fun with it, and you got to give them credit for trying to be creative with the murders. There's only so many ways you can impale people unless you get really imaginative, and that sequence is sort of a fun one. So maybe there is something to the idea that at this particular point when the movie was made, that the premier villain in American movies was no longer Jason or Michael Myers. I mean, the premier villain was Freddy Krueger, who was, as they always say, when you have a great villain in a whether it's a Western or a horror film or an action film, the villain is what sells the movie. It's the thing that people love the most in the movie. And Freddy Krueger had, at that point, began to corner the market from 1984 forward. And so, that's a whole nother school of thought around Freddy Krueger and whether he began to dominate those movies at the expense of the other characters as time went on. And certainly Robert Englund became a big star because people loved Freddy Krueger. They loved his wit and his sort of spirit of play, and the play between being completely sadistic and being a Joker on the other hand, and sometimes at the same time. And so I think other villains like Jason at this time, you were stretched to take the character to a different place, to take the movie to a different place, which is how we ended up with this whole angle of telekinesis and so forth in this movie, because you just couldn't go as usual. Slasher films had began to die off around 84, and certainly by 85, 86, 87. I mean, we're in a totally different world. So I think that the pressure to please people, but to reinvent and try to make a little bit of money, and this movie, of course, didn't make much. It was $19.6 million. Eventual box office gross was really on. And so I think you're onto something there, that the character had to evolve a little bit, and certainly Jason at that point was a household name. I mean, I feel sorry for anybody who has the name Jason simply in life, because from this point forward, I mean, I believe it or not, I went to high school with somebody named Michael Myers. I want to tell you, in the small town I grew up in, I had Michael Myers in high school, and the strange guy living down the corner block in the big old house that nobody wanted to go past was named Fred Krueger. I had both of those two characters, and my my hometown. Can you believe that?
Oh, that's crazy.
And so I think Jason needed to go somewhere else, and Kane Hodder kind of took him somewhere, and Buechler did as well. So that's funny. But I want to move a little bit off this and talk about the effects in the movie, which were gutted significantly prior to the release of the film. I mean, we know over the course of time that the Friday the 13th movies fell on the sword of the MPAA. Certainly, Part 2 has long lost footage that we've all seen in still photos that may never be seen because Paramount claims that it was destroyed from their vaults, and some of the other films certainly had to be cut as well to make it through the gauntlet of the MPAA. Now, this movie was significantly cut, and so when you're talking about a movie that's reason for being is murder scenes, really, once Siskel and Ebert famously said that every other part of human existence has been taken out of the Friday the 13th movies, and only death is the only part that exists. And if you're taking the death out of the death movie, which is what's happened in this movie, so we very, very rarely see any visceral material in this movie. And if we do, it's for just a short second. That scene at the van that you mentioned with the party favor, and also the squeezing of the head, which was supposed to be squeezed down in the original cut into like the size of a chestnut, as you know, with the skies of blood shooting out of it. I mean, these are just two small examples in this movie of things that didn't make it past the MPAA censors. So the movie kind of, at the end of the day, it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't really deliver even on the gore and the terror, simply because not through the fault of the artist, but the censors, which I'm saying the MPAA, the censors wouldn't let it through.
Yeah, I think this movie went back for 9 cuts through the MPAA, if I remember correctly, and yeah, it's wild, especially because on that documentary you can see the kind of the grainy VHS footage of the extended versions of those scenes, but because the actual footage, I guess, was probably similarly lost or destroyed over time, they're saying that there's no way to even restore that if they wanted to come out with an unrated cut of Part 7, which is a shame. And Buechler was a staunch supporter of having his original vision come out, especially because the version that came out was relatively bloodless. I mean, there's some gore in here, but when you think about what it could have been, like the spectacle of the death and a lot of the cutting away of stuff, it just kind of doesn't work. In fact, I think if it had just been the run-of-the-mill Friday the 13th movie and taken out that psychic component with Tina, it would have been completely forgettable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strange thing to ponder when you look across all the movies, because if you were to, for example, take some of the effects that Tom Savini did in the original Friday the 13th, like the character of Marcy getting the axe into her face, and several other things in that film, and others, you would wonder why things couldn't pass muster through the MPAA in this film, which really tamped down the effects to the degree that they're just so quick. They're like lightning fast. I mean, even the famous death, which is sometimes called the most famous in the entire franchise, the sleeping bag death, was minimized to one toss of the sleeping bag against the tree. And so I don't know if it's the mood or the moment or what's happening that reflects what the MPAA decides to cut. But in this particular movie, they made such significant cuts to it. So I think that in my view, as a horror film, it doesn't truly deliver because it's not horrifying enough. And I think that as I think I said in the last episode, and may say in some of the future ones, in my view, and this is purely subjective, the idea of a horror film may be to horrify you, which means that you don't have to have suspense. Maybe a thriller and a suspense film is something different, where you're creating atmosphere and building sequences and so forth. But I guess there's nothing really too scary in this film, simply because everything happens so quickly. There are very quick deaths followed by effects that don't exist anymore, and so the whole thing just feels slightly off center. As a horror film, it doesn't quite horrify you, it doesn't truly scare you, and so I'm not quite sure what it actually does.
And the sad thing is the potential was there, like the sleeping bag kill, which it's kind of goofy in the way that it's presented in the theatrical cut, because originally Kane Hodder was slamming that sleeping bag against the tree a dozen times or more, and in the theatrical cut he slams it against the tree once, as you'd mentioned. But if you look at the body that kind of half falls out of the bag during that really quick flash, you see the girl's face and she's clearly dead. If you look at the sleeping bag, it's drenched in blood from, I guess, those earlier takes. So it just kind of makes no sense. Again, if you're watching it for the first and possibly only time, you're not going to pick up on this stuff. It's only for us geeks who watch these things over and over again. They're like, wait, that's a glaring continuity error. How could one slam against the tree? I mean, she wasn't a grape. But and then the other idea was, I mean, because if you think about the idea of, your impulse once you see this thing coming through your tent is slipping into the sleeping bag is like an impulse of like, it's safe, it's, closed, I can kind of hide, but then you're stuck in there. If they'd had maybe a shot of like her inside the sleeping bag, like getting lifted off the ground, that's real psychological horror. The idea of having your face grabbed and being squished down, we get a little bit of that on the actor's face because you start to see some of the blood, pouring through Kane Hodder's hands.
Yeah.
But even sustaining that, take out the gore effects, just have a bit more of that pressure squeezing. Again, as an audience member, I'm like, I would hate for that to happen to me, and I kind of feel like it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, don't get in a sleeping bag if you're in a horror film. I mean, if you look at Prophecy, which has got one of the funniest murders of all time, 79's Prophecy, the toxic waste monster movie. There's one of the great sleeping bag death in that movie, which is, good for laughs if anybody wants to look it up on YouTube. That's certainly out there. What's the other sleeping bag? Oh, in Mother's Day, where the three young women who are college friends go out on their yearly excursion into the woods, and they get dragged through the woods, actually dragged in their sleeping bags across the woods and into the home of these psychos. So the messages kind of stay out of the sleeping bag. But what was in the sleeping bag that produced all that blood, as you probably know, was gallons of blood were in there, and then they had a dummy in there, and so they just exploded all that blood in that dummy, and then probably with not much thought to the continuity of the fact that that probably wouldn't happen. So.
And then you've got all these weird decisions of things that did make it in. Like right before the sleeping bag girl bought it, her boyfriend was in the woods carrying, I guess lumber to make the fire. Jason grabs his head and punches his hand through the guy's chest. And we see the dude fall forward and Jason's arm kind of come out of it almost like a sock puppet, and it's all bloody. How is that less grotesque than some of the other stuff that they had planned? It seems all very arbitrary.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who's on the MPAA board, but if you hear John Carl Buechler talk about it, he says, look, there are a bunch of housewives from Fresno who just decide whatever mood they're in, and and there's just nothing to be done about it. And so I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty, maybe you could argue that that's in the dark, and it's, you don't see the puncture actually technically go in. I don't know what the distinction is. But yeah, that's certainly a really visceral moment. I didn't count up how many people are actually killed in this movie, but I know it's a lot. And I want to mention something to you too, and I want to get your take on how effective you feel these sequences are when we do this thing that the films have gotten into the last couple times. They've in the last couple outings where we just only introduce characters in the movie so they can be killed. That's really the only reason. So they turn up in one scene and then they're killed in that scene. So the franchise at a certain point, I think Part 5 really moved away from introducing the 10 main characters or the 8 main characters and then kind of taking them off one by one. And they just began to introduce everybody left and right who happened to be in the area. That seems to be the criteria for being killed, is if you're in the area and you happen to have a car breakdown, or you want to have a picnic, you want to have a date in the woods, you want to do whatever. You got to stop to go to the bathroom somewhere, you're going to be killed. And so there's this kind of massive assembly line production and dispatching of anybody and everybody. And somehow, I don't know what that adds to the movie. I mean, what do you think?
I think that because I think I had read that criticism or heard it in the documentary before I watched the film again, and it kind of stuck in my head. I feel like there's a bit more, not character development, because the movie's interested in effects and other things, but it isn't as arbitrary as, look, here's a character showing up and then they're killed 2 seconds later. They have a little bit more going on here. In fact, the original title for this that they put on the script that they sent out to everybody was Birthday Bash, because the one character, Michael, is the cousin of the Tina's boyfriend by the end of the film. he's showing up to this cabin because all of his friends got together to give him a surprise birthday party. He and his girlfriend never make it because they're, I think, Jason's first victims when he comes back. But I did like this idea of the kind of subplot, these weird little character dynamics. I feel like there was a big story, kind of like actors say, you know, what's my backstory? I'm going to write my character's backstory, even though they've got 5 minutes of time. I feel like someone wrote that script out and we just got the little edited versions. Um, I almost wanted to go back and see that. The couple in the van that we mentioned, there was some infidelity, I guess. Eddie, the sci-fi writer, blew the cover of the one guy to his girlfriend, implying that he was covering while he was cheating. That
Yeah.
stuff's kind of interesting. And I was really keyed into what these characters were doing. It's not depth, but there are moving parts to this story that are cut short, which I feel adds a little bit of realism to this, because up until they come across Jason, which it all does happen very quickly, they've got their own little dramas and stuff playing out.
Yeah.
Some of it's outright ridiculous, like Melissa. I don't know what her deal is or why she's at this place at all. Who invited her?
I know. I mean, but your point is a fair one. I mean, look, I mean, if you were to ask Buechler about this, he would say that they sincerely gave it a run to give the main character of Tina a real psychologically sound profile as a child who came from abusive household, not of her, but of her mother, who has struggled psychologically since the death of her father. In fact, I mean, the first 20 minutes of the movie or so are the introduction of those issues, as well as her kind of special powers or gifts. And so all of that, including Terry Kaiser from Weekend at Bernie's, who plays that kind of nefarious villainous doctor of hers. I mean, this is all an attempt to have another kind of movie within a movie that's more of a psychological profile. I mean, now that's a bit of a reach. Like, as we said earlier, what's on the screen might not justify that description, but that's what was intended by the artist behind it. So there is more attempted, you know. So I think we should give credit for that.
Yeah, and I did like the dynamic between Dr. Cruz and the Shepherds, you know, Tina and her mother. Her mom, by the way, had this tremendous like 1980s Gem and the Holograms hair. She was like in her 40s. I'm like, what is going on here? I didn't understand what I was looking at.
The best parts of the movie. I'm not kidding.
And then at the end, it's almost like there's so many parallels, as we mentioned, between this and Friday the 13th, the final chapter. You've got the parallel cabins. You know, you've got the kind of the family home, and across the way is the party cabin. You've got the death of a parent who is set up as this kind of a virtuous, you know, caring character, and it's really tragic when they die. But when Mrs. Shepard buys it in this horrible fashion, because Dr. Cruz uses her as a human shield against Jason, when Tina comes across her body, it's the way that she's lit. Oh, yeah. Usually when they find the bodies in the woods, they're, you know, strewn about, they're bent into these unnatural contortions, right? Or they're half naked and, you know, half bloody. But with her body is sort of lying in state, or almost like it's in a coffin, with this kind of angelic light coming down over it with a nice little spot of blood. It's very odd. But I like that choice, because she was a character that I didn't want to see get killed, and I don't want to see her mangled, bloody body. Talking about cuts, one of the things I had read about in that book is that Dr. Cruz was supposed to get it sort of worst of all. Jason had that, I don't know what the tool is, but it's some kind of like an edger with a circular saw on the end of it. He drills into Dr. Cruz's upper cavity, and apparently the original cut was supposed to be his intestines wrap around the circular saw and get stuck, and that's how he dies. What we see in the film, it barely looks like it should have killed him, because it's like you see the reaction on his face, you see like a little bit of zzz, and then he's dead. Like, it's the weakest.
That's a funny story behind that tool, that weed tool or whatever it is, that hedge trimmer that Buechler, I think, was in the hardware store, and he said to the employee there, you know, what is that thing? And the employee said, oh, it's a, you know, weed whack, whatever it is. And he said, oh, okay. So they appropriated that and turned it into a weapon in the movie, which is kind of funny. But to your point about the mother's death in the woods, the one thing that I always find funny is that when loved ones are killed in a movie like this, the protagonist gets over it like that. And so she finds her mother's body dead out in the woods. Now, keep in mind, this is somebody who's been so traumatized by the death of her father many years ago that she's been in therapy for her entire life. And she finds her mother's body, and she just sort of cries for a minute, and she looks at the body, and she leaves it in the woods. In life, I think if you found one of your parents' bodies in the woods, you'd probably try to take it out of the woods. You might not leave it there lying in the middle of the woods with all the other dead bodies. But for the sake of argument, I mean, she leaves the woods, and then at the end of the movie, everything seems okay. By the time she's in the ambulance, I mean, at least they've survived. And this is just a thing that happens in movies all the time. And maybe it's because movies are shot out of sequence, and so the emotions sometimes aren't calibrated in a way that is the right build for the moment in the story. So maybe the scene in the ambulance was shot earlier, and she wasn't contemplating so much. Lar Park Lincoln wasn't contemplating, hey, my mother just was murdered. And she's lying out in the middle of the woods. So she gets over that pretty quickly, at any rate.
Well, if we're going to apply logic to these movies, which I know you're railing on me all the time about, but I'll indulge you here for a second. I could see that, maybe, yeah, she's upset about her mom, but she's also like, I've got to get back to camp because this guy who just killed my mother is also going after other people, so we got to save them. There's no time to mourn. I mean, when she does get back to the cabin, I think she does start crying. She said, he killed my mom.
Yes.
Lar Park Lincoln, for all the, and I think she's, a good actress. I grew up loving her in this movie, but for all the talk that she did about how she was like, I think she was 24 when she did this, and all the other actors were like 19 or 20. So she was like the elder statesperson on the set, which is kind of weird. Plus she was married, and she was trying to hide that fact from everybody. I just feel like for all the talk there was about her as an actress, she really should have been up to some like Meryl Streep level shit in this movie. And I didn't get it.
I just don't get it either. And bless Buechler for being so kind in his assessment and talking about Lar Park Lincoln being, the most beautiful and talented actress, and putting her in. He basically says she's one of the best actresses ever, and this and that and the other thing. And maybe she is. I haven't seen her on Knots Landing or the other things that she did at the time. And really, let's be honest, Friday the 13th movies don't show the full toolkit of an actor's expressiveness. Although some actors really punch through, like Amy Steele, Melanie Kinnaman, they can really punch through. But Lar Park Lincoln in this movie, to me, isn't all that memorable. And to be honest, I don't know. It just, something about it isn't working for me. And I never really cared that much about the character. I felt that attached to her. So I guess I didn't have a lot of investment in it. And that's, I mean, maybe up to this point, the only other one I felt was a little off was Dana Kimmel in the third movie. But in this one, I think the characters have been kind of genericized to a degree that they're maybe not. I mean, it would be a big job for Lar Park Lincoln to drag this character up, I think, to a level of three-dimensionality, even though the movie tries at times. So I think there's just certain things about her as an actress that we're not seeing in this role, probably, that we might have seen in other roles. That I'm not sure we can see the full scope of Lar Park Lincoln in this movie, although this is a big claim to fame for her. I just don't think she's all that great in it, and I don't know how you can be great in this. So I'm willing to give her a pass in it, but yeah, there's something about her that's and I'm speaking only for myself, not all that accessible.
And I think part of there's two things here. One, I think if the movie had been more about the idea of Carrie versus Jason as it was kind of billed, because if you look back at Carrie, a lot of people just kind of think of the prom scene where she's at the height of her powers and she's killing everybody and she's this triumphant character. But for most of the film, she's afraid of her own shadow. Sissy Spacek is so great in that role because you really believe this transformation from someone who's constantly picked on and has real psychological issues to someone who's like, screw it, you're all dead. With Tina, she is, upset because she had, yeah, I guess, killed her father accidentally, 10 years earlier or whatever. But I don't really get a sense of a transformation. I don't know why I should be actively rooting for her. I think if she had been more timid and more vulnerable and really played up more of the Dr. Cruz angle with her. But then again, that's more of an Elm Street type movie. And I don't know, unless you make the movie 3 hours long, you keep cutting back and forth between their therapy sessions and people getting hacked in the woods, how you make it work. I don't know. But as far as her accessibility, part of that, and I was really conscious watching this because I had found out about her, her age and her kind of insecurity is the word I'll use, but I don't know if it's fitting, unease with being around these younger actors, plus the fact that she'd had no chemistry with Nick Spertus, who is, her boyfriend in the film, on top of the fact that, he was a gay actor. And apparently there was a number of the male kind of main parts in this movie were gay. Either,
Yeah.
they were closeted or some of them were out. And some of them, in the case of the actor who played Eddie, apparently he hadn't come out for years. Like, he was still struggling with it.
Um,
And yet these are all straight, playing straight characters. So I wonder if all of that was kind of going into a soup of, yeah, this is kind of awkward and stiff and they don't really get along. In
yeah.
fact, in their initial meeting, when Tina, her suitcase opens up on the ground and Nick, Kevin Spertus's character, comes over to help her, she's embarrassed, but she's also kind of like huffy and stuffy about it.
Yeah.
And I was looking at that, knowing that they didn't get along. I'm like, how much of this is just not even them acting? It's just the outtakes of them.
Yeah.
Like,
You've got to love the interviews when you're talking about people that have nothing to lose by just telling the truth of their experience. It's not that these are A-listers at the top of the industry, afraid they're not going to work anymore or whatever it is. So they just tell the truth about the set. And so the stuff you're talking about is some of the more delicious, fun stuff that was going on. I mean, 4 of those actors, and maybe more. I mean, 4 of them are on record that were gay actors. I mean, Kevin Spertus, as Lar Park Lincoln says, didn't know who he was at the time, and that contributed to it. I think that was her quote. Bill Buechler, Jeff Bennett, Craig Thomas. I mean, these are all gay actors, and so it was kind of like a gay pride, version of Friday the 13th. And there may have been others too. I don't really know. But it's just funny to hear these interviews where they talk about her and they use the B word about her and say that she was very unpleasant to work with. And then she turns around and says, well, I had a terrible time working with Kevin. And like, there's just no political correctness around the descriptions of all of this. But the one thing I do love in this case is that everybody who was involved in this movie said they were really excited to be a part of it, that they loved the fact that they were cast in it. I mean, this is everybody from the actress who plays Tina's mother all the way down the line to Kevin Spertus. All the guys said, look, we were thrilled when we got this, when we found out that Birthday Bash was Friday the 13th. I love the first Friday the 13th. This is not always the case, as you know. Sometimes actors try to remove themselves from it or distance themselves or say they never saw one of those movies, or as we've talked about before, they talk offhandedly about them. But these actors really embraced it. I guess they must have had a good time, some of them.
yeah. And I think it comes across. I mean, the party atmosphere on set, as described, reminded me like of a less sleazy version of what was apparently going on the set of Part 5. A lot of drinking and drugs and I guess illicit sex. But it does come across as like, hey, we're making a fun, kind of a summer slasher movie. I will say on Lar Park Lincoln, and again, this is probably down to the script. I don't know if they were conscious of it, but Part 7 is not just the entry in the series, it is also the number of times that Lar Park Lincoln's character exits a scene by running off in a tearful huff. I began to notice this and I started drawing little tick marks on my notebook because it became really conspicuous really fast. It started off in the beginning scene, I guess, when little Tina runs away from her parents' house because they're arguing. Sidebar, my question is, who has a calendar hanging up outside their house? Now, yeah, again, they had to set up what day it was, but it's just kind of ridiculous. So young Tina runs away to the boat because her parents are fighting. Older Tina runs away when she, mistakenly blows up the pearl necklace on, Melissa. She runs away from Dr. Cruz. Like, at least 50% of the time she's on screen, when she leaves a scene, she's running away from something and she's crying. It's like a drinking game.
Yeah. I mean, so I think you used the word runs off in a huff, and that's kind of the overall emotion I think that she conveys in the movie, is that there's something huffy about her in almost every scene. So I hadn't noticed a number of times that she had exited, but I think we should talk about the telekinesis effects for a moment too, like the placing of the magnet in the, as we know in the backstory, the matchbook that moves across the desk before it bursts into flames. I mean, those effects are pretty good. You know, the as Buechler said, like, you know, the sofa that's on a wire, even though it's a pretty light sofa, like an IKEA light sofa on a wire going across the room. I mean, this is kind of fun stuff. I mean, I don't know whether I would, if I were to write a sequel to Friday the 13th, would have thought, let's put some telekinesis in there. But they sell those special effects, and there's kind of a novelty about it. It is sort of fun.
There is, and I think the matchbook scene is great because until you find out how it's done, you really do wonder how it's done, because it's not stop motion. You're looking for the other actors to like be paused or something while it's going across the desk, but no, it's completely happening in real time, and it's not a computer gag. It reminds me of, going back to, you know, Freddy, that scene in Dream Warriors where the slash marks are being done across Joey's chest in the hospital, which is just, you know, really cool to look at. This is almost like the next level of that. Yeah. But I think, again, going back to Lar Park Lincoln, she is strongest in this movie in that last 20 minutes when she is running from Jason or confronting him and she's not talking. She's got a great, like, push in with the camera, look pissed, kind of, you know, summing your psychic abilities kind of quality to her. I think that's why she really works in this movie for a little bit.
She's got a great, she's a great looking person too. So the movies like her. I mean, the look of her, the camera likes her. And I think, to be fair, as well, it's not all that easy, I think, to concentrate as if you're going to move something with your mind and have the camera holding on you as you go through a kind of range of expressions about something that's patently absurd and isn't real. And so I think, you know, there are some challenging elements to this role that are beyond the kind of just running through the woods, screaming or otherwise, that maybe she otherwise would have been asked to do. So I want to give her a little bit of credit for that, and she's nice to look at. So there's nothing wrong with that either, right? So and Kevin Spirtas is great looking too. I mean, they make a great looking couple. You wouldn't know they hated each other, but the history of movies is clearly littered with actors who had chemistry on screen that hated each other, like Richard Gere and Deborah Winger, for example. So that, you know, whatever's on screen between them works perfectly okay, you know.
Tina might be, you know, although her character is interesting, you know, Lar Park Lincoln doesn't have the presence of some of the other final girls, as we've discussed. But I think Kevin Spirtas is one of my favorite Survivor guys of the series, because first of all, he's the only one I know who can pull off a monochrome outfit. I mean, he's got jeans, a jean jacket, and a blue knit top, but he doesn't look like a Smurf somehow. Awesome hair, but also the fact that his character is up at the cabin because it's his cousin whose birthday it is. Yeah. None of these people are his friends. They're his cousin's friends. And the look of disdain on his face, as he's kind of like the Lar Park Lincoln of that group, like a bunch of these kids running around like, what are you doing? And Melissa's trying to hit on him. And he said, I think, I don't even like you. And she's like, so.
Yeah, they're like the Karen and Ken, as they call them today, of the Friday the 13th series.
It's for sure.
So yeah, I mean, I think we would be remiss not to talk about the effects really quickly, because Buechler, that's his forte. I mean, he did the effects, right? And so this is a guy who had a history of sort of doing that prior, and did it in other capacities, and made other movies too. Like, you know, he made a Troll and Dolls and other things like that. Cellar Dweller, I think, was his too. So this is not a guy who's a slouch in terms of effects and wanting things to look good. And we really have to go back to that unveiling of Jason at the end, because it is quite an interesting moment, particularly the moment that follows it, where the father is resurrected out of the water and pulls Jason back down in. I mean, this is it takes the movie into the realm of like fantasy in a way, a little more. The look of Jason, it's a little more of a fantasy and a little less, I would say, hardcore violent exploitation. It's a little more fantastical creature-like if you will. And so that's an anomaly in the series, I think, too, and it's pretty cool. Now, unfortunately, the makeup effects on the father coming out of the water ended up getting nixed by the producers, and Buechler couldn't do it. And so the idea that the father's coming up out of the water after years of being down there and it just looks like he went for a swim, and is coming up totally normal is somewhat laughable in a way. But I think the effects in this movie are, when we can see them, when they haven't been trimmed, are pretty good.
Yeah, I almost wish that just the staging of that scene had been different, because if you think about it, it's almost a callback to the first film where it ends, on a lake and you've got this figure coming out of the water as a complete surprise. In this one, it just raises too many questions. Like, is that the ghost of the dad? Was his body just left down there? Because with Jason, I just thought of another question. Tina resurrects Jason on accident because she wants her father to come back. So she's drawing this psychic energy, this, I want you to live kind of thing, pulls up Jason by mistake. Okay, another side point. Sorry. First of all, did they never recover Tina's dad from the lake, his body? Because it's just wreckage. We see him down the pier or whatever, collapses. So his body's under there. It's not like they can't find it. It's not like he fell to the bottom of the ocean. But secondly, but at the end of part 6, we see him at the bottom of the lake and he's not dead because his eye opens. So I don't know if he's been unconscious for a decade, if he was down there and just died and she, resurrected him, or just woke him up. But this whole idea of her dad coming back at the end, it almost stretches into a different kind of supernatural boundary. It's like, it's one thing if she resurrects his corpse. It's another thing if she summons his spiritual essence to come and take Jason out. Again, we're asking these movies to make sense, and they absolutely don't. But it's just kind of a strange, weak ending. I think it was meant to be sweet, like, oh, the dad finally came back and, there was that moment of redemption. But again, I think the film needed to be about that, more than just being that kind of grafted onto a slasher in order to really work.
Yeah, I mean, look, like all the stuff we're talking about is so conceptual and trying to take the series in a different direction and do something new. And as we said, we want to give points for that, for the creativity around that. But I really wonder, Ian, if the series, if it had just stuck to the basic formula, the 10 Little Indians formula that's been around since time began, or at least movies began, and hired a little bit better directors who were skilled at building suspense sequences and really scared us in that way, staying at the brass tacks level of what really scares people, which is what the first couple movies were all about: the fear of the dark, the fear of isolation, the fear of whatever, bodily dismemberment. I mean, those few things are scary enough, I think. And so when we talk about all the stuff under the lake and the supernatural part of it and going in a new realm and the telekinesis and all this stuff, and now we're going to talk about Manhattan, going to Manhattan and this whole bit. I mean, wouldn't it just be so much more effective if we just had skilled directors building great horror sequences? I mean, there was, believe it or not, there was talk from Buechler that they were going to, I think it was him, that they even wanted to get Fellini to direct the Friday the 13th movie at some point, and which, we know absolutely that would have happened. But I mean, the point is well taken. Like, I think as the series went on, because the desire to make these things so cheaply so they could be profitable, the constraints of making things cheaply and the, cutting corners on things, and the talent, I think, sometimes involved in them. I mean, it just took the series in very weird places. And so I think sometimes you can get really far afield from what makes something like this effective. Right. And sometimes we're reminded in the most simple horror films, like A Paranormal Activity, A Blair Witch Project, that the very simple things that play with primal fears are what scare people. And so when we look at this movie, Part 7, there's not a single scary moment in it because it's gone really far afield from primal fears. So I'm just contemplating like why this movie isn't scary, and maybe that's what it is to me.
I think, yeah, I'm with you. I think if there had been a desire to make really scary movies, they could have pulled together people to do that. I don't know if they would have had to almost go the original Vision for Halloween route, where it became almost like an anthology, where every other movie would be a different kind of a scenario.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can do straight horror with Jason Voorhees for 12 movies and still have it stick. I think you almost need to venture out into space or Manhattan or wherever just to give it some variety. But at a certain point, and certainly by the late 80s, people were going to these movies just to see the body count and the boobs. That's what they became. Any notion, and I think we see that just kind of stylistically because this film and even part 6 and certainly part 8 had this glossy sheen to it. It's like this is the MTV Generations horror movie, whereas parts 1 through 3 and even 5 had this kind of like, oh, this is a scrappy independent production. We're really out in the woods following these people around. These horrible kind of lo-fi ways of dispatching them are creeping people out. Yeah. Whereas now we're saying, okay, we're going to ram someone's head through an RV wall while it's still moving. We're going to kill people with party favors. We're going to have this psychic girl. It's not really about horror anymore. It's just, it's an amusement park ride.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and really a lot of it has to do with the shifting of the culture and the genres that become popular, right? And some go up and some come down, and so it's true that the early '80s era of slasher films went out of vogue, and so this was in the limbo period before Wes Craven changed the game again with Scream, right? And post Scream, it's been very hard to make a traditional horror slasher film simply because there has to be some high concept or meta quality about it. There has to be a big rug pulled out from underneath us in some way, a big surprise in the story. There has to be, we still see this even this year when we look at movies like The Lodge, there has to be some super high concept shift in the story that we didn't see coming. It's not enough for us to take, 10 people, put them out in an isolated setting and have them all killed one by one just to generate suspense because now we're expecting something that a game changer in the middle of the story that it's the cabin in the woods or something like that. It's like, what are we not seeing? That's the big picture here. That's going to be the big surprise. And so the simplicity of just looking at primal fears in horror films, it's not enough. I mean, that's table stakes in a way now. And at this point, when this movie was made in the second half of the 80s, I mean, it was not enough at that point either because there were all kinds of other horror films that were huge successes, and there were fantasy sci-fi horror films like Aliens, like, those kinds of things that were coming out. And then, as was mentioned, and it was interesting to ponder on some of the research for this film, that Fatal Attraction was a big film at that time as well. And of course, that was about something totally else. I mean, it combined the idea of being stalked and the thrills of being stalked and potentially being killed with a social subtext that was so important. They had the entire country debating, who was right and who was wrong, and at the same time, it was psychologically terrifying. So this whole idea, maybe what you're saying, that you couldn't do that anymore, and you never have been able to do it since. That you're without higher concepts like telekinesis or psychic concept here.
Well, I think the one exception, we're going to talk about this at the end of the year, might be the remake of Friday the 13th in 2009, because aside from them having to do some fudging to make Jason the killer in that, because they're trying to relaunch the franchise, but you can't really relaunch it with Mrs. Voorhees as the killer because everybody knows that trope. But that is, from my recollection, I haven't watched it in a long time, it's a straightforward, stalk and slash horror movie. You've got some, jokiness to it, but it's not incredibly meta or anything like that. So, but then again, that came out in 2009 and there's a bunch of legal issues and stuff like that. So we haven't seen sequels. So I don't know that it has caught on in the culture to like, oh yeah, a straightforward, stalk and slash horror movie done in the modern era can work. We don't need to be constantly winking or introducing magical elements to it. I don't know, but do you have any kind of closing thoughts on The New Blood? Because before we sign off, I would like to talk about the big news of the week, which is that Scream Factory is putting out the Ultimate Edition Blu-ray package. But let's close the book on part 7. Any closing thoughts?
Two things for me that I can never kind of get over, which is not just about this, but about 6 through, the rest, is that I always think that I like the characters in the earlier movies. Like they're human, recognizable people, even if they're just still cardboard because they're in a horror film. I mean, there's either something the actors brought to it, and we could pull up many of these moments with the final girls and the guys, and some of them we even remember by name because they were memorable characters in these universes, and we liked them, and so there's some investment we have on whether they survive or not. So the fear that they're feeling is fear that we can kind of feel in the moment, and we can identify with them and put ourselves in that situation because we like them. There's been some investment. I don't feel that at all in this movie with any character at all. They all just seem to exist in the movie to be killed in some way, and they're not nuanced. And I also really I can never get over the fact, I guess, that the moving of Camp Crystal Lake to, in this case, Mobile, Alabama, and a warehouse in Los Angeles where they shot most of the interiors. I mean, I really, really genuinely, as these movies go on, begin to miss the New England setting of the first few movies, right? Which was just so evoked such an atmosphere and is so germane to what I think about as a great Friday the 13th movie. So those two things are just not in this movie. And I will say the very basic level, I feel like a Friday the 13th movie should scare you, and this movie just didn't scare me, you know?
Something you touched on there, I think I feel the same way in terms of the atmosphere and the locations being very key, because with the original Friday the 13th movies, one of the things that I felt, especially during the stalking scenes, like Mrs. Voorhees' point of view, through the woods, is it was such a small production. Nobody knew that these films were going to be anything. So they really are these kind of independent things of people going out there and shooting. You almost get the feeling that they could be in danger, going out there. Like someone could make a movie about people shooting a horror movie, but they're actually getting stalked by an unseen killer. I felt like that in those early movies. Like if something went wrong out there, they'd kind of be on their own. With this, yeah, it just feels very, I mentioned the lighting and the kind of aesthetics of part 6 and 7 that evokes the idea of, oh, this is a product. This is being worked on to evoke that kind of thrill ride amusement park response from the audience, which you don't really have from the original.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. And I think there's a little bit of a fatigue for me sometimes with Jason also. It's sort of like in the earlier films, I was genuinely unnerved by him. And in the later films, I just sort of get to this point where I say, oh, it's him again,
Yeah.
Oh, there he is again. Oh, he's got a machete again. Oh, is it going to go through the stomach or is it going to go through the head? I mean, it's just sort of this familiarity as well. So maybe if someone were only seeing this movie, they hadn't seen the other ones, they might have a virgin reaction to this series and they would be scared by it, right?
Maybe I'm with you. I don't see anybody being scared by this, really, but unless it is like they're 8 years old and this is their first horror movie. But briefly, I mean, this movie does have a 40th, a storied history of 40 years, and Scream Factory is putting out this ultimate box set, which looks like it's got some, new stuff, but apparently all of the extras from the many different versions that have been put out over the decades are you looking? What are you looking forward to most about this set? I know you've pre-ordered it. You're a dedicated fan.
What I'm looking forward to in this set is the 4K scans of the first 3 films. So that is something I want to see, even though the idea of bumping down 4K scans to 1080p discs is just patently absurd to me. I don't know why they can't release UHD discs when they have the 4K master of the movie, which would be a huge uptick for these movies to have a UHD release, and many horror films are having them. Halloween, The Evil Dead, Christine. I mean, good on the list of UHD horror films. The House by the Cemetery. I mean, actually, Maniac, Zombie, House by the Cemetery does what I just mentioned, which is it doesn't bump down to 1080. But I think the 4K scans are going to be really interesting because they're going to be new masters and they'll look better, they'll look cleaner, and they'll be fun to watch. So that'll be cool. The 3D process, I guess, will be cool on the third one because that's been transformed now into real 3D, which is different than the red green lenses on the former version. So that'll be cool too. So that's sort of it. I mean, my big disappointment, which is just a personal thing, is that I want somebody at some point to just shake the trees of the Paramount Vault and find that footage from Friday the 13th Part 2, which would be just a dream come true. That would be in the order of the restated footage from My Bloody Valentine that came out a few years ago, which just is a huge, which Scream Factory did, which is a huge game changer for that movie and something that we were told was lost for decades, but suddenly it was found. And so I'm holding out hope that the footage can be found for Friday the 13th Part 2. Nothing in the world, no price tag in the world would keep me from owning that if that were to become available suddenly. So my good friend Jeff Nelson, who runs things at Scream Factory, hopefully at some point will be able to find that. But this will be a wonderful box set for many reasons. We love to knock on these movies, as we've been doing with some of them, and we will continue to do when we get to outer space and Manhattan and other places. But nonetheless, it is an enduring franchise, and to have them all put together with all of these extras, and it's just a Herculean job to put this together, and everybody wants it. Everybody will appreciate it, and it'll be the final word until we get the UHD versions and the lost footage. So for me, it's a pretty good fun thing.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. I have not made the jump to 4K UHD yet, so this is going to be satisfactory enough for me. In fact, I kind of wonder. And again, I don't think I've watched a full movie in 4K, so I can't really speak to it. I've just, back when we could go into Best Buy, I would go into Best Buy and look at these TVs, and it was almost too perfect. Like you could walk into the screen, and I wonder, with Blu-ray, I kind of had this adjustment period where it looked so crisp that it almost looked like high def behind the scenes video instead of a movie. You lost kind of that grain, that veneer. I wonder with 4K if it's going to, because these movies are, again, lower budget, especially the early ones. Are you going to lose some of that spookiness to them? Or is it going to make it richer? Like, oh my God, we're in the camp being chased by Mrs. Voorhees.
For me, it's totally richer. So two quick things responding to what you said. Most of the time when you're in, most people, maybe people perceive this or they don't. When you're in a store, you're getting that setting that's demonic, which should always be turned off, which is the setting called, otherwise known as soap opera setting, which is smooth motion flow, frame interpolation, whatever it's called. And so that is designed to create additional frames and give you that high def video version, which people like Tom Cruise, Christopher Nolan, so many people have come out and said, stop this, eliminate this setting, because it's bastardizing the movies that we're making. It's taking the film look out of it. So you never want to have that setting on. You want to turn it off immediately when you get home. The second thing is DNR, which is digital noise reduction on the image. So the smoothing of the image and the removing of the pixel structure, the film grain, which gives film the look of film, that can be taken way too far. So sometimes you look at a 4K transfer like Terminator 2 and it's been overly DNR'd. It looks beautifully glossy, but not necessarily what the movie's supposed to look like. So you got to be careful when the transfer is happening, that it's not overly DNR'd. But when the film grain structure is there and it comes up to that 4K resolution, and you look at a disc like Evil Dead or the Halloween disc, I mean, these are to die for transfers. You just can't get enough of them. And so so many of these movies have been scanned in 4K. We're seeing Jaws, for example, in its 4K version now. We know we've seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre, not in UHD yet, but there's a 4K scan for it. So we've seen the 4K scan on 1080p. There are so many 4K scans that exist now for horror films. If they just bump them up to UHD, we're going to open up that whole other world of quality. Of course, you've got to have your 4K projector, your 4K TV, your 4K player. You've got to have those with Dolby Vision, with HDR. I mean, there's so many variables to how the 4K is going to look in your home. And you got to check off all those boxes and do it exactly right. But to me, it's a totally otherworldly thing. And it just is, it's so much fun to have them in that format. So.
Well, whenever I do upgrade, I'm going to give you a call so you can give me all the tips.
You got to come over and see some 4K over here sometime before you do the upgrade.
All right. I definitely will. Because I'm dying to see what that actual home theater looks like in person. I've seen behind you for the last 7 months. But the other thing is, to your point about Friday the 13th Part 2 and that lost footage, just wait, because there will be a 4K UHD set. Just give it a couple of years. And because every time they come out with one of these things, like new content, new stuff, it feels like they're running out of new stuff for these because they've been so exhaustively gone over that you just wait. The next version, that'll be an exclusive, I'll bet.
I'll never be leaving my house. I mean, I'm telling you, Friday the 13th Part 2 and The Gates of Hell, Fulci's Film City, The Living Dead. We now have a 4K scan of that, which just came on 1080p. So we just need the UHD, and we're going to be there, and I'll never leave the screen. This will be it. So.
Spoken like a true horror diehard. All right, man. Thanks so much again for talking the new blood and points beyond, despite the hiccups, which no one will know what I'm talking about if I do my editing job well, which means that I do have to explain it because, yeah, bad connections aside, thanks a lot. And I quote unquote can't wait until we talk about Jason Takes Manhattan.
Yeah, that's going to be, I'm expecting some theories to come from you on this one. So,
I don't know if I can apply that much thought to Jason Takes Manhattan.
oh boy. Well, it's going to be fun. We'll save that for next time. So.
Yeah. All right, man. Take care. And yeah, see you later.